Hello, I'm Ginny Marshall with DSI Work Solutions, and I'm pleased to bring to you this final video in our series on job function testing. Today we're going to be exploring some common questions that come up regarding testing, both from the employer's perspective and also from the provider's perspective. Realize that many of these questions are common concerns between these two groups. They're important to both. So I will try to point that out as we go through a list of approximately 15 questions. Granted, there could be 100 questions, but we will focus on 15 that are very common. So let's get started first with some questions from the employer's perspective. Of course, the employer is the recipient of these services and their results. So first, a very common and very important question is, what are the legal requirements for job function testing? Again, we mentioned this in our series, but let's reiterate that in terms of legality, the testing must meet the requirements as put forward by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act. Testing is allowed on many levels, but what's so important is how those results are used. If those results are used to withhold an offer of employment or to deny an individual the ability to return to their job after injury or illness, then those tests must absolutely prove to be consistent with business necessity. Along those same lines comes a question about assuring that tests are fair and unbiased. This requires all stakeholders to be involved in the process to assure that they are in agreement that as the testing is being designed, which as you recall is coming from a job analysis process, that it indeed is job related and consistent with business necessity. This needs to therefore also involve the most important stakeholder, which is the employees themselves. Another question that employers often ask is, what types of results should I expect from investing in job function types of testing? Remember that employers are looking to support their primary goals, which is to produce or deliver on whatever their product or service is. So it is important that results are going to support that. If we're talking about hiring, we're talking about the ability to get individuals into the right seat, to get them into jobs in which they're going to be successful, productive, and produce quality. When we're talking about return to work, we're talking about bringing individuals back where they are able to perform their jobs skillfully and not be at risk of injury. Of course, we're also interested that individuals not be at risk of injury in the hiring process as well. Therefore, the testing should differentiate between people who are a good fit and people who are not. The different ways in which that can be handled will be addressed in some of the questions that are forthcoming. Another concern employers have is whether or not everyone is going to go along with the process of using testing, whether it's for hiring or for return to work or perhaps other objectives. Again, this goes back to what we talked about in the first question. Involvement of the stakeholders will flush out any concerns and ultimately assure that the parties are in agreement that testing that has been designed is indeed job-related and consistent with business necessity. Another important question is, how much does the testing cost? Remember, employers are very sensitive to costs, especially those that are not directly related to the ability to sell their product or service. We're more of an internal cost. Therefore, it must be justified by being able to mitigate those internal expenses, such as reducing turnover or first-year injuries when we're talking about hiring, and when we're talking about return to work, costs that are related to expenses such as time away from work and the cost to replace an individual who's unable to work or unable to do their normal duties on their job. In order to be justified, those costs must be quantifiable. In other words, they must show a reduction in the cost related to hiring or the costs related to injuries or illnesses that occur subsequent to hiring or at any point along the course of employment. Especially where hiring is concerned, employers are interested in how quickly they're going to get the results when testing is performed. Delays in receiving the results can cost employers in terms of being able to hire an individual or losing an individual who may have other options. It's important that the employer is able to get those results in hand as quickly as possible, preferably immediately after the testing has concluded. Another question has to do with the intensity of the upkeep of job function testing. In essence, a common question is, how often do we have to review job function tests? Again, we addressed this earlier in our video series, but it's important that they at least be reviewed on an annual basis and any time there has been a significant change in the way the particular job is being done, such as the addition of new equipment or procedures. Another question has to do with trends. What is happening with testing? Is this something that is increasing in utilization? Will it be around for a while? As a therapist who has done testing for more than 3 decades, I can tell you that that is a shifting perspective depending on where we are in the hiring cycle. So for example, today, employers are having a very hard time finding employees. They are reticent or reluctant to turn away anyone who is willing to accept a job that they have an opening for. So testing has experienced a downturn in that environment, or for some who have maintained testing, they have begun to use it differently. In other words, instead of rescinding offers of employment, they may use it to strengthen their training and onboarding procedures to assure that individuals are well placed and or acquire the skills or the physical ability necessary to be a good match with the job. It's also driven ergonomic initiatives for many employers. That trend could shift again. In a decade gone by, in my experience, there was a glut of workers and employers had more of an opportunity to pick and choose. Testing that is well designed, that meets the legal requirements that we have discussed before, can stand up to scrutiny as it relates to an employer's ability to rescind a job offer. What is important there is that the testing clearly reflects job relatedness and consistency with the needs of the business. So let's shift now to the perspective of the provider. Again, remember, these are shared concerns and questions between both employer and provider, and it's important that both understand the questions from each other's perspectives. A common concern with providers who will deliver these services is how they're going to integrate into the services they already provide. More specifically, how long does it take to administer a job function test? Clearly, this impacts scheduling. This also impacts what can be charged for these services, which also has to be acceptable to the employer. Today, the more common length of time for these job function types of tests for either hiring or return to work is approximately 30 to 45 minutes with a bias more towards 30 minutes. So what this means is that the testing that's done has to be the most critical of what the physical demands are of the job and the most impactful in terms of this information being helpful to improving hiring and placing, as well as preventing injuries and enhancing return to work initiatives. Another concern for providers is maintaining patient confidentiality. Here, it's how this documentation related to what an individual can do is presented back to the employer that's important. And this is where we really need to differentiate between that which is medical information and that which is work information. The most simple example here to give is to consider when a physician gives a restriction in writing to an employee to deliver to their employer. It doesn't reveal medical information. It is a statement of what work activities the individual can perform. Although medical information certainly is involved, that is retained in the medical record and not delivered to the employer representative. But it's there to back up what the physician has written into their work restrictions. Similarly, when we are delivering information relative to workability, we need to follow that concept and deliver to the employer information that speaks to whether or not the individual is able to perform the work activities, not divulging confidential medical information that should be retained by the provider appropriately in case it is necessary at some point in the future. So as the examples we showed you depicted, the job function test talks specifically about workability and does not in and of itself reveal medical information. That information is retained on physical exam forms and history forms and does not therefore have to be delivered to the employer. If the employer wishes to receive that information, it's important that they follow the guidelines that require them to maintain medical information separately from human resource types of files in double secured filing systems, and only certain qualified personnel are given permission to handle that information. Another question for providers is, how do they know for sure that the tests are reliable, that they're accurate, and that they're valid? And I want to really point out here that it's important that any professional, any individual who is providing this testing be assured that processes are in place and have been taken to assure that these tests have been validated, are therefore accurate and reliable. Because even though the responsibility for creating that situation may not lie with the one who is providing the test, we ultimately have some level of responsibility. So if a provider is being primarily a testing center for another entity that has designed these tests, they should seek and be confident that those steps have been taken. That's important to the relationship that's going to exist between the provider who's actually delivering the services and the employer that's being served. If you are the provider who is designing and validating these tests, then it is important to take steps that assure that not only are the tests accurate, but they're well understood. If the tests are not well understood in terms of job relatedness, if this cannot be explained clearly to all of the stakeholders, which include the employees, then there could be difficulties for the employer. That usually means in the legal arena. Legal challenges are time-consuming, resource-consuming, and undesirable. So therefore, this step of validation is critical. And one more question that's common for providers and important in today's professional world in terms of rehabilitation is, how do we assure that this type of testing aligns with evidence-based practice? Depending on the type of testing and the type of validity, there are different approaches. Within the testing format that we have been showing you, there is evidence because the jobs have been analyzed, data has been collected, it has been reviewed and verified for accuracy by those who have familiarity with the job. This is documented, and if possible, signatures are obtained, and testing is performed on skilled workers to assure that indeed the test does not disqualify an otherwise skilled and able worker. So therefore, there is a body of knowledge that presents evidence as to what the job is requiring, as well as evidence to the investigation of the accuracy of testing. Clearly, there are many other questions that could come forward, but hopefully this list gets you thinking. If there's an important question that's on your mind, please feel free to ask it and we'll comment on it below. For more information on job function testing and the process in its entirety, please visit our website, dsiworksolutions.net, where you can take a look at all the courses that we offer as it relates to the development of job function descriptions and job function tests. You are also welcome to preview the coursework with no obligation. Thank you, and we look forward to bringing other topics to you in our newsletter series. Stay safe.